A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
Hey everyone, welcome back to My Weird Prompts. I'm Corn, and I'm sitting here in our living room in Jerusalem with my brother Herman.
Herman Poppleberry at your service. And today we are tackling a topic that is near and dear to my heart because it involves over-engineering, industrial standards, and the high-stakes world of protecting expensive toys. Our housemate Daniel sent this one over to us. He has been looking at upgrading his gear storage for his new cinema camera and wanted us to really dive into the world of hard-shell protective cases.
It is a great prompt because, on the surface, you are just looking at a plastic box. But if you have ever spent $5,000 on a camera rig, a high-end drone, or sensitive scientific instruments, you realize very quickly that your equipment is only as safe as the polymer surrounding it. There is this huge gap between a consumer-grade plastic bin you get at a hardware store and a professional-grade hard case. We are talking about the difference between a container and a shield.
And I think people get caught up in the tactical aesthetic. You see these cases in movies, in the back of military Humvees, or being tossed off a boat by a National Geographic photographer. But the physics of why they work is much more interesting than the look. We are talking about the difference between something that just holds your stuff and something that provides a life support system for hardware in hostile environments. When you drop a case, that energy has to go somewhere. A cheap box transfers that energy directly to the contents. A well-engineered hard case manages that energy through material deformation and internal isolation.
Right. We should probably start by defining what we are even talking about when we say a hard case. Most people immediately think of Pelican, which is the industry titan, but there is a whole ecosystem out there now. We've got Nanook from Canada, SKB from the United States, HBRC from Italy, and then the budget options like the Apache cases you see at Harbor Freight. But what actually makes these cases special? Is it just the thickness of the plastic?
It is a combination of the material science and the geometry of the seal. Most high-end cases, specifically the classic Pelican protector line, are made of a proprietary polypropylene copolymer. It is an open-cell core with a solid wall design. This is crucial because it makes the case relatively lightweight while remaining incredibly strong. If you used a solid, dense plastic for a case that size, it would be too heavy to carry. By using this structural sandwich of materials, they get maximum impact resistance. It is essentially a honeycomb structure on a microscopic level that can flex without breaking.
And that impact resistance is what people are paying for. I remember seeing a video where they dropped a Pelican case out of a helicopter at 300 feet, and while the outside was scuffed and the concrete it hit was cracked, the internal sensors didn't even register a damaging G-force. But Herman, we have talked about waterproof tech before, back in episode 726. How do these cases handle the elements compared to just a standard dry bag or a sealed plastic bin?
Well, that brings us to the IP67 rating, which is the baseline for a professional case. For those who didn't catch that earlier episode, IP stands for Ingress Protection. The first digit, 6, means it is completely dust-tight. No particulates are getting in there, even in a sandstorm. The second digit, 7, means it can withstand being submerged in 1 meter of water for 30 minutes. To achieve that, the engineering of the O-ring seal has to be perfect. If you look at a Pelican or a Nanook case, you will see a deep groove in the lid with a neoprene or EPDM rubber gasket. When you throw those massive latches, you are actually compressing that rubber to create a hermetic seal.
That compression is key. I have noticed on some of the cheaper off-brand cases that the latches don't have that secondary click or that cam over action. It feels like you are just pushing plastic against plastic. If you aren't getting that uniform compression across the entire perimeter of the lid, that IP67 rating is just a suggestion, not a reality. On a real Pelican, you can feel the resistance as the gasket seats itself. It is a very deliberate mechanical connection.
It really is. And there is a second-order effect to having a truly airtight seal that most people don't think about until they're on a plane. If you seal a case at sea level here in Jerusalem and then fly to 30,000 feet in a pressurized cargo hold, or even worse, an unpressurized one, the pressure differential is massive. I have seen people get to their destination and find they literally cannot open their case because the external air pressure is pinning the lid shut with hundreds of pounds of force. It is essentially vacuum sealed.
That is where that little circular knob under the handle comes in, right? The pressure equalization valve? I have seen people fiddling with those on older cases.
Precisely. But here's the cool part of the modern engineering. On a high quality case, you don't actually have to turn a knob anymore. It is an automatic valve. It uses a Gore-Tex membrane. This membrane is fascinating because the pores are small enough to block liquid water molecules, which are relatively large and have high surface tension, but large enough to let air molecules pass through freely. So, as the pressure changes during a flight or a mountain climb, the case breathes automatically, keeping the internal and external pressure equalized without letting a drop of water or a grain of dust in. Cheaper cases often use a manual screw-type valve. If you forget to open it before a flight, you are stuck using a screwdriver to pry your case open later. If you forget to close it before a boat trip, your gear is going for a swim.
So we are already seeing the trade-offs. You pay for the material science of the shell and the automation of the pressure valve. But let's address the elephant in the room. A Pelican 1510, which is the classic carry-on size with wheels, can cost you over $250. You can walk into a discount tool store and buy a similar-looking Apache case for $60. Is the name brand actually 4 times better?
It depends on your use case, but for professional travel, the answer is a resounding yes. One of the biggest failure points on cheap cases is the hinge pin. Pelican and Nanook use stainless steel pins that run the entire length of the hinge. Cheap cases often use shorter, thinner pins or even just plastic tabs molded into the frame. If you drop a loaded case on its corner and the hinge snaps, the seal is gone instantly. Then there is the warranty. Pelican has that famous forever warranty. Their slogan is literally, you break it, we replace it, forever. I have heard stories of people sending in cases that were melted in fires or crushed by tractors, and Pelican just sends a new one. Most of the budget brands are a buy it and forget it situation. If it breaks, you are buying a new one, and hopefully your gear survived the break.
I think there is also something to be said for the consistency of the polymer. I have noticed that cheaper cases tend to get brittle in extreme cold or soft in extreme heat. If you are doing field work in the desert or the Arctic, that matters. We discussed the trap of cheap goods in episode 807, the Vimes Boots theory of economics, and I think it applies here. If the failure of the case results in the destruction of $5,000 of gear, saving $150 on the box starts to look like a very poor mathematical decision. It is an insurance policy you only pay for once.
It is the false economy of the cheap. Now, once you have decided on a case, the next big hurdle, and where Daniel's question really gets interesting, is how to actually put your gear inside it. This is where most people make their first big mistake. They get the pick and plug foam that comes standard with most cases, and they just start pulling out squares until their camera fits.
I will admit, there is something very satisfying about pick and plug foam. It feels like a craft project. You lay out your gear, you trace it with toothpicks, and you pop out the little cubes. It looks professional for about a month. Then the foam starts to degrade.
That is the big secret of the industry. Pick and pluck foam is a temporary solution at best. Because it is pre-scored into those little half-inch cubes, the structural integrity of the foam is compromised from day one. Over time, as you pull your gear in and out, the walls between the cutouts start to tear. Even worse, that cheap polyurethane foam is susceptible to off-gassing and shedding. You will find little black foam crumbs inside your lens mounts and in your sensor housing. It is a nightmare for electronics. And after a year or two, the foam can actually start to undergo hydrolysis, where it becomes sticky and starts to disintegrate.
So, if we are moving away from the standard foam, what are the alternatives? I know Daniel was asking specifically about packing accessories. I have seen the padded divider sets, which look like a camera bag inside a hard case.
Padded dividers are great for flexibility. If you change your kit frequently, say you are a wedding photographer and your lens needs change every weekend, you can just move the Velcro dividers around. They offer decent shock protection, but they don't provide that absolute mechanical isolation that foam does. If I am shipping a case via FedEx or checking it as luggage on an international flight where I know it will be tossed around, I want something more robust. That is where Trek Pak comes in.
Oh, I love Trek Pak. It is that corrugated plastic with a thin layer of closed cell foam on either side, held together by these little U-shaped metal pins. It looks incredibly clean, almost like a laboratory kit.
It is the gold standard for organization right now. It takes up much less space than traditional foam, so you can actually fit about 30% more gear into the same size case. Because the dividers are rigid, they don't sag or tear over time, but there is a learning curve to cutting it. You have to be very precise. My advice for anyone using Trek Pak is to lay out your gear, leave at least an inch of space between items, and use the dedicated double-bladed cutting tool to ensure the edges are square. If you mess up a cut, it is an expensive mistake.
You mentioned mechanical isolation earlier. Can you explain that principle? Because I think people assume that as long as the gear is in the box, it is safe. But there is a specific way you should be positioning things relative to the walls of the case, right?
This is the most important rule of packing a hard case. Never, ever let your gear touch the outer walls of the case. The hard shell is designed to deflect impact and distribute energy, but it still flexes. If your camera lens is pressed right up against the side of the plastic wall and that case hits the tarmac, that energy is transferred directly into the glass. You want at least 1 to 2 inches of foam or padding between your equipment and the outer shell. This is the crumple zone.
It makes sense. I have also seen the sandwich method used for really delicate stuff like specialized sensors or glass. You put a base layer of solid, non-scored foam, then your gear in the custom cutout, and then a top layer of convoluted egg crate foam in the lid.
The egg crate foam in the lid is essential because it applies gentle, uniform downward pressure. You don't want your gear rattling around inside the cutouts. If there is movement, there is friction. If there is friction, there is wear on the finish of your gear. When you close the lid of a properly packed case, you should feel a slight resistance in the last inch of travel. That tells you the lid foam is engaging with the gear and locking it in place. It is like a seat belt for your electronics.
What about weight distribution? I have seen people pack all their heavy V-mount batteries on one side of a rolling case and their lightweight monitors on the other, and then the case keeps tipping over or wobbling when they try to roll it through the airport.
Center of gravity is huge, especially for the larger cases like the Pelican 1650 or the Nanook 960. You want your heaviest items at the bottom near the wheels. This keeps the case stable while you're walking. If you put all the weight at the top, every time you hit a curb, the case is going to try to twist out of your hand. It is also better for the internal foam. If you have a 10-pound battery sitting on top of a delicate plastic monitor over a long flight with plenty of turbulence, that battery is going to crush the foam and eventually start hammering against the monitor. Always pack from the wheels up, heaviest to lightest.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, we should talk about the different capacities and sizes because it can be overwhelming. Pelican alone has dozens of different series. You have the Protector, the Air, and the Storm. What is the actual difference?
The Protector is the classic. It is the heaviest and the most rugged. It is made of that standard polypropylene. The Air series is their newer line, which uses a different resin called HPX2. It is up to 40% lighter than the Protector series without sacrificing much strength. For most people who are traveling and worried about airline weight limits, the Air series is the way to go. The Storm series actually came from a company called Hardig that Pelican bought out years ago. They have a different latching system. Instead of the double throw latches that you have to muscle open, the Storm cases have a push button latch. It is much easier on the fingers, but some purists argue they aren't quite as secure in a high-impact drop because a button can theoretically be depressed by an external object.
I prefer the Nanook latches myself. They have that patented power claw system where you have a locking slide and then the lever. It feels very intentional. You are never going to accidentally snag a Nanook latch on something and have it pop open. Plus, Nanook is doing some great work with aesthetics. They offer more colors, which sounds superficial, but if you were standing at a luggage carousel with 50 black Pelican cases, having a lime green or a desert tan case is a massive functional advantage.
It really is. And that leads perfectly into the labeling side of things. We did an entire episode on industrial labeling, episode 759. When you have these high-value cases, how are you marking them? because a big black box screams expensive gear to anyone who knows what they are looking at.
It is a double-edged sword. You want to identify your gear, but you don't necessarily want to advertise that there is a $10,000 camera inside. I usually advise against putting brand logos like Sony or Canon on the outside of the case. Use a high-quality industrial label with your name and phone number. I actually like to put a label inside the case as well, under the lid foam, just in case the outer label gets scraped off. And as we discussed in the labeling episode, use a permanent solvent-based ink or a thermal transfer label that can handle the UV exposure and the friction of travel.
I also recommend using a stencil and some high durability spray paint for your initials. It looks professional and it is much harder to remove than a sticker. Another pro tip, put a fragile scientific instrument sticker on it instead of camera gear. It tends to be treated with a bit more mystery and respect by baggage handlers.
I have seen some people using those Apple AirTags or other GPS trackers hidden inside the foam. Is that becoming standard now?
It is. Most of the newer cases actually have dedicated spots or aftermarket plates where you can mount a tracker. Just make sure you don't place it right against the outer wall if you are worried about signal attenuation. Though the plastic is usually thin enough that it isn't an issue, it is a cheap bit of insurance. Just remember that an AirTag won't help you if the case is at the bottom of the ocean, but it will help you find it in the wrong terminal at Heathrow.
So, let's talk maintenance. People think these cases are indestructible, so they just throw them in a garage and forget about them. But if you want that IP67 rating to hold up for 10 or 20 years, you have to do a little bit of work, right?
The O-ring is the heart of the case. Over time, rubber can dry out and crack, especially in dry climates like we have here in Jerusalem. Every year or so, you should pull the O-ring out carefully, using a plastic tool so you don't nick the groove, wipe it down with a lint-free cloth, and apply a very thin coat of high-quality silicone grease. You don't want it dripping, just enough to give it a slight sheen. This keeps the rubber supple and ensures a perfect seal. Also, check your latches and hinges for grit. If you have been filming at the beach, sand in the hinges will act like sandpaper and eventually wear down the stainless steel pins. A quick blast of compressed air or a rinse with fresh water goes a long way.
What about the foam? If someone is listening to this and they already have a case with old, crumbling pick-and-pluck foam, can they save it? Or is it time to start over?
If it is already crumbling, it is done. The structural integrity is gone. But you can buy replacement foam sets or better yet, upgrade to a custom closed cell foam insert. There are companies like My Case Builder where you can send them your gear list or use an online CAD tool to design a layout, and they will laser cut a single block of high-density polyethylene foam for you. It is expensive, sometimes costing as much as the case itself, but it will last the life of the case, it won't shed particles, and it provides the best possible protection for high-end optics.
I think the big takeaway here is that the case is a system, not just a product. You have the shell, the seal, the valve, and the interior. If any one of those parts is neglected or low quality, the whole system fails. Herman, if you had to give someone a rule of thumb for when to buy a Pelican versus a budget case, where do you draw the line?
If the contents of the case are worth more than $500 and they are leaving your house, buy the name brand. If you are just using it to organize cables in your workshop or store tools in your truck, the budget cases are fantastic. They are still way better than a cardboard box or a thin plastic bin. But for travel, for professional work, or for anything that might end up in the hold of an airplane, the engineering of a Pelican, Nanook, or SKB is worth every penny. It is about the peace of mind. When you are sitting on a plane and you see the baggage handlers tossing cases onto the conveyor belt, you don't want to be wondering if the hinge pin on your $50 case is going to hold. You want to know that the copolymer polypropylene is doing its job.
It is an investment in the long term. Now, before we wrap up, I want to touch on the future of this stuff. We are starting to see smart cases now, right? Cases with integrated scales, so you know if you're over the airline limit, or electronic locks that you can open with your phone.
We are. To be honest, I am a bit of a skeptic on some of that. The whole beauty of a Pelican case is its simplicity. It is a mechanical solution to a physical problem. The more electronics you embed in the shell, the more points of failure you create. If your smart lock battery dies while you are in the middle of a shoot in the Sahara Desert, you are in trouble. I think the sweet spot is a traditional, over-engineered case with a few well-placed third-party trackers or sensors inside. Keep the box simple and the tech inside it.
I agree. There is something comforting about a latch that just works because of physics, not because of a Bluetooth handshake. Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive. I think Daniel is going to be very happy with this breakdown. It certainly makes me want to go out and reorganize my own gear closet.
Just don't use the pick and pluck foam corn. I am warning you. It is a siren song that leads to foam crumbs in your sensors.
I hear you. I will look into the Trek Pack or maybe some custom laser cut inserts. If anyone else out there has a specific way they organize their gear, or if you have a horror story of a case that failed, or one that saved your equipment, we would love to hear about it. You can get in touch with us through the contact form at myweirdprompts.com.
And if you are finding these deep dives helpful, please take a second to leave us a review on Spotify or your favorite podcast app. It really does help the show reach more people who are interested in this kind of technical exploration.
We have over 900 episodes in the archive now, covering everything from battery chemistry in episode 784 to the ruggedized laptops we talked about in episode 658. You can find all of those and a full RSS feed at myweirdprompts.com.
Thanks for joining us for another episode. It is always a pleasure to nerd out on the details that most people overlook.
Definitely. Until next time, stay curious and keep your gear safe. This has been My Weird Prompts.
See you in the next one.
Alright, I think that covers the essentials. I am still thinking about that helicopter drop test. It is amazing what a little bit of well-engineered plastic can do.
It really is. It is the difference between a container and a shield. People forget that energy has to go somewhere. If the case doesn't absorb it, your gear will.
Well said. We will leave it there. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Take care.
Bye for now.
Ngai.
Actually, Herman, one last thing. What about the wheels? I've seen some people complain that the wheels on the older Pelican cases are too loud on city streets.
Oh, that is a classic issue. The standard wheels are hard plastic. They are great for durability on a tarmac, but they sound like a freight train on cobblestones. A lot of people swap them out for aftermarket polyurethane wheels with ball bearings like rollerblade wheels. It makes the case silent and much smoother to pull. It is a simple mod that makes a huge difference if you are walking through a quiet neighborhood early in the morning for a sunrise shoot.
Good tip. I might have to do that for my rolling case. Alright, now we are officially done.
Sounds good.
Talk to you all soon.
Xidia.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My Weird Prompts.